Good evening. This is Elen Krut, and today is June 26th. And today we are continuing with the interviews, and we have the pleasure of speaking to Robert Brown. Robert, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for doing this. And why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
My pleasure. My name is Robert Brown. I'm an attorney. Before I was an attorney, I was a captain in the New York City Police Department. I retired 20 years ago. And started working as an attorney. I have my own firm. I have an office in Manhattan, and I have an office here on Staten Island. I have what's basically a general practice. I do both civil litigation and criminal defense work.
And how long have you been practicing for?
I've been a lawyer now for 20 years. I've had my own firm for 14 years.
That's impressive. And my understanding is that you have employees.
I do. I have full-time employees. I have 2 non-attorneys and 1 attorney.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump into it, and I'm just going to ask the question. Can you please tell us how your practice was affected during this difficult time? What happened?
Well, as everybody knows, we were sort of gearing up to what was happening. Everybody knew that we were going to have to do something to address the pandemic. And I just happened to have the attorney that works for me is pregnant. So she was a little anxious about coming into work. Nobody really knew at that point how COVID was transmitted or just exactly how contagious it was. So before New York instituted its pause, I set her up to work from home. And even now that we're back to work, she's still working from home, just to be on the safe side. So as that happened, then the very next day that after she started working from home, Governor Cuomo came out and said, we're going to start a pause. We're going to shut down all businesses, and 30 days to stem the tide. We heard back starting on March 18th. And it's funny, on March 18th, I was in Nassau County filing an emergency order to show cause, and the courthouse was pretty much empty. And I was bringing this because somebody's house was in foreclosure and they had an auction scheduled. And when I went, they said, listen, we're staying everything. Don't even worry about it. Come back when everything opens back up. And still here we are now in June 26th, over 3 months later, and you still can't file it. It's sort of
right. I would imagine a lot of proceedings were frozen and people have no idea what's happening to their cases. Now, you mentioned that the courthouse was empty. Did you get an opportunity to see anybody wearing masks? What did you observe about people and their behavior?
This was before the wearing of masks, really.
Okay.
This was still March 18th. There was, maybe 1 or 2 people were wearing masks, but most of the people weren't. That was in Nassau County. I cover as far out as Nassau County and then the 5 boroughs of New York in my practice. So that was in Nassau. Since then, we closed, and there hasn't been any live appearances at all. What I found is I actually missed a court appearance for the first time in my legal career. That everybody was stopped in the month of March and April. Nothing was really happening. And I had a federal court judge that was still working. And little did I know that she was still conferencing cases. So I had to write a letter explaining that everything else was sort of on hold. I thought she was on hold too, but we were able to continue with that and ultimately settle that case. But then I have cases, Nassau County Commercial Division case where the judge was doing Skype conferences from home. And now, I guess it's about 2 weeks ago, we started with this court staff came back into work. So once that happened, now I'm getting more and more court Skype conferences pretty much every day now, or almost every day.
Okay, and you mentioned that one of your employees, she started working from home before. Was it hard for you to make that transition to learn the technology? How did you learn the technology? Is it still foreign to you?
I had the ability already set up, in light of, I was a lawyer during September 11th, and I worked at a large firm that was in the frozen area down in Lower Manhattan. We also, in Staten Island, all made our way through Hurricane Sandy. So there were times in my 20 years as a lawyer where I didn't have access to my office. So we were it was a pretty easy transition for us for my staff to work from home. I have although I'm surrounded by paper, you can't really see it. We also have pretty much a paperless practice where as soon as something comes in, we scan it and we save it on a server. So every single document can be accessed. The physical mail comes to the office, but I'm sure you've gotten this in your other interviews, during the course of the last 3 months, there's almost no mail coming in because everybody's doing everything by email.
Right. And how would you describe your court appearances at this point? I would imagine, because I personally did not have any via Skype, so it would be interesting to hear how would you compare your court appearances to in-person ones. I would imagine there's a huge difference.
Well, I think that the Skype app, especially the very first one I did, is nowhere near as good as Zoom. Mm-hmm. And I'm told it's because it's more secure, and that's why they're using Skype. The first one was terrible. One lawyer, we had no audio or video on, right? And he had to type. He could hear us, and he had to type in whatever he wanted to say into the chat. The other one, we had audio but no video, and then 2 of us had audio and video. So it was 4 attorneys, and the judge had audio and video. So I think they've gotten a little bit better. I've had, within the last week or so, I've had calls with Judge Marazzo here on Staten Island. I've had Skype conferences with Judge Dollard, and with I just had one with Judge Aliata, where we did a settlement conference using Skype, and it actually worked very well. And I have some next week. I know I have one with Judge Porzio on Monday. So they're becoming much more frequent. I think that they're just trying to keep tabs on a case and just trying to move things along right now, which for 3 months we were pretty much on hold. My firm, we continued to work on things. So on the day that they reopened, as I'm sure you're aware, e-filing was closed for a period of time. Mm-hmm. And then it reopened, I'm going to say a month or so ago. And on that day, we had like 8 motions ready to go. So we had done work during the time period where places were closed, and we were able to file our motions. And then about 2 weeks ago, they opened up filing of new cases, and I had 5 or 6 lawsuits that we filed on that first day of new cases that came in during the time period, or cases that we had already had that we said, this is the time now that we're going to be able to put them in suit. I found that on I do some personal injury work. I found for a period of time the insurance people, the insurance defense people, the insurance claims adjusters sort of disappeared. And now they came back like a week or 2 ago. And in the foreclosure defense aspect of it, there's a lot of people that are pretty much either not working there anymore. I'm sending emails and they're bouncing back. But it seems like I don't know whether they laid people off or what the story is, but you're not getting fast responses on those cases.
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of discussion out there about these video conferences, but I also know that you do jury trials, and you do a lot of them, and some of the famous ones. Once again, very impressive. But truthfully, can you imagine this technology becoming a permanent factor in litigation? And as some people are saying, hey, we can have jury trials over Skype or over Zoom. Do you think that's possible?
Well, I think anything is possible, right? But
how would you manage something like that?
Again, part of it would be expecting the average citizen, potential juror, to have the technological capabilities, right? So some of my cases are against the city. So I have some 50H hearings, which is like an initial hearing that you have in a case against the city, and they're civil rights claims, right? The people that are suing the city. And those clients, in my opinion, the ones that I've tried to set up the 50H hearings virtually like this, they don't have the technology to do it. And we don't have the ability to socially distance with me sitting next to the person right here to be deposed, right? So especially before we reopened, I couldn't possibly do that. So I do think asking the average person to have the ability to go on Zoom might be asking a lot. I think that more and more people are getting it right now because of this. I certainly understand the frustration on behalf of the plaintiffs bar, where they have cases that they want to try. I have one big civil rights case that we're pretty close to trial on, that I don't think there's going to be any more jury trials in the year 2020. I don't see that happening. I was supposed to have a jury trial the week before, the 17th. I had a hearing in New York County, and I was supposed to pick a jury, and ultimately the case resolved. But what they had told jurors at that time was, if you think that you have anything that could possibly be COVID, don't come in. And they were still able to pull enough people to put together a panel. I think we had about 40 people that they were going to bring up for me to start the voir dire, and we were able to resolve the case. So I would have had it, and at the time, had we picked a jury, it may have ended in a mistrial, because the very next day they said, if you are in a jury trial, consider, busting it and not going forward. So,
Right.
And especially, this was a relatively simple case. It would have been a short trial, but a big federal case, you could have a trial that goes on for a month or months, and you're in the middle of it, and now you have to, you lose your jury on a mistrial, and you have to start all over again. So that's certainly not the best case scenario. One of the things that I hope comes out of this is more efficiency from the court system. And when I do a lot of practicing in federal court, and in federal court, when the judge tells you be there at 11 o'clock, you better be there at 11 o'clock. And I mean, I've had times where, coming from Staten Island to go to the Eastern District in Brooklyn, and you can have a broken down car on the BQE or the Gowanus, and
Not on the Stews.
it takes an extra hour to get there. They don't want to hear it, right? They should, like, you should have left 2 hours early. So you got to make sure that you're there. But if you're there at 11 o'clock, your case gets called between 11 and 11:15. Rarely do you have to wait more than 15 minutes. And, that's probably the biggest inefficiency in our system, is when you answer on a calendar call, you're answering for a motion, or you have to wait for a conference, and you get stuck waiting for a period of hours. And where we practice in Richmond, it's usually pretty good. In Kings County, many times you can get stuck after lunch, right? And if your client's paying you by the hour, that's really not fair to the client. But the court has certainly this inefficiency. So you would hope, we have some judges here. So, and I know that you were a family court practitioner at one point. In family court, they tend to be, they give you times. Now, whether they keep those times is another story, right? But they'll tell you,
Right.
come at 11:15.
Time certain, yes.
Right, you have a time certain. And some of our Supreme Court judges are doing that. The ones with, especially one I can think of with a family court background, where he gives you a time certain to come. So for me, I think that if we want to limit social interaction and push social distancing, we should go to that, a time certain, and say, come at 2 and 2:30 in the afternoon, come at 3 o'clock, and use the whole day. And this way you don't have a calendar call, because the reality is, too many of the New York State Supreme Court judges got sick with coronavirus. Several died from it. And the reason is because they're in a room with 100 people a day, right? And sometimes you have your regulars, but sometimes there are different people. So you're interacting with a lot of people every single day, all at once, all in the same place. And if we can institute a way where, you have a gatekeeper with your law secretary or your clerk and you narrow down who actually has to see the judge, we can protect our judges. And you spread it out across the day so you don't have 100 people in the room at once. I think it's a safer way to practice. And if we could use, some sort of virtual Skype type conference or even motion, we argued a motion in order to show cause in front of Judge Marazzo on the phone the other day. I think that makes us more efficient. And me personally, like I said, I cover as far away as Nassau County. That would make it better for my client that they don't have to pay for the time I travel back and forth. So, and you can, as a lawyer, you can cover a much larger area if your appearances are virtual. You don't have to worry about traffic.
So I personally think that technology will never replace in-person contact, but I feel like what you said is true, especially when the attorney has to go to upstate New York for a proceeding. Maybe they might want to consider substituting that proceeding with something like Zoom, especially if it's just a motion or a conference, not a trial. So maybe there should be a compromise of some sort. But you mentioned something before, and I want to come back to it. I have to be honest with you, the way you described your transition to, to video conferencing and then filing, as if it was an easy, breezy, peasy piece. Was it so easy for you? How was the process? Were you concerned at all?
I wasn't. I really have to say I wasn't. I don't know. Maybe it's my police background.
Maybe.
Because as a cop, you got to deal with whatever comes your way. And I always say this: I've been shot at twice in my life, right? So whatever comes is not the same as a bullet coming at you, right? So really, nobody that I personally was close with had coronavirus. We did what they asked us to do. But we dealt with it, and I moved. I would have liked to have gotten through more of the things on my to-do list, which I didn't, and maybe I wasn't as efficient as I would have been had I been open. But we moved everything along, and we were ready to go, and we're back in business. And I can honestly say I wasn't worried about the virus at all. I really wasn't, and I certainly wasn't worried about the practice of law, because I knew no matter what, we'd make it through it. Everything works out in the end, and that's how I felt. And I know that the attorney that works for me that's pregnant was very nervous, right? And she didn't want to go out of her house to go grocery shopping, didn't want to step out of her house for anything, and the only thing she really left the house to do was to go to a doctor's appointment. And I understood that, and I understood that her experience in life and my experience in life and her fear, because she said to me many times, look, if you get sick, you can take medication. If I get sick and I'm pregnant, I can't. So I understood that. So, we put her in a cocoon, and she stayed home nice and safe. And even now she said, look, now that we're open back up, I'll come back into the office. And I said, at this point, she's due in August. We're in the end of June. I said, just write it out until you have the baby. There's no need for you to come in, because we're just as efficient whether she's here or whether she's at home.
Right.
And it really has had very little effect on her efficiency. So, you might as well be comfortable and safe.
Right. And I think it's wonderful, because so many law firms had to let go of their employees, even temporary. But I've spoken to a lot of people, and they didn't have such luck. They were just let go, unfortunately. So your associate is a lucky person for you to be understanding like that.
Well,
but
on that point, I made them a promise at the beginning of this, and I honestly didn't think it was going to go this long. I really didn't. But I said, no matter what, I'm not laying anybody off.
Okay.
So don't worry about it. So just like I said, for me, I wasn't nervous. I wanted them to not be nervous about the financial aspect of it, and they weren't. And I didn't. And then the government helped, certainly. We got a payroll protection grant. Hopefully we won't have to pay back because we're using it. Hopefully. And the Small Business Administration just gave a loan. So that certainly helped out a lot to ease any of the anxiety that would come along with any sort of a break in cash flow.
I have to say that I really love your positive attitude. And what, if any, piece of advice would you give to a fellow practitioner? Because not everyone is so optimistic as you, not everyone is so put together as you, not everybody is an ex-cop like you who can take anything that comes his way. So what advice would you give to someone who's, let's say, struggling?
You know, I'm in Christopher Lane here, where there are other attorneys, and you're quite familiar with it. And at least one is a real estate attorney, and he was taking it pretty hard, and I'm sure the people that I do criminal work, but the people that only do criminal work are also having it very hard, because there's really almost no new cases coming in. There's almost no new arrests happening. They've stopped appearances on all criminal cases. They've stopped the speedy trial time from running, so you don't have to appear in any way, shape, or form. So for people in those practice areas, I understand, and I've spoken to some friends that are there, and what I said to them is, think about other areas that you could practice in. Now would be the time, when you have spare time, to try and learn another area of law, something that complements the practice that you're in. Whether it's, and right now it's still stopped, but traffic court, you got to figure that traffic court is going to start picking up. You might want to add that so that you have a quick cash flow as soon as you open back up. Or maybe civil rights goes well with criminal, or there may be things that could go well with real estate, and
Real estate goes well with bankruptcy.
right. So, and I've had these discussions with people saying, you know what, maybe there's another area of law that you can get involved in, that you can learn new. And it would be a good time to take, CLE classes, and I have to tell you, I'm looking myself right now at the business interruption insurance issues that, insurance companies took premiums from people for, decades. And now when it's time to pay, they're all finding reasons not to pay. And that's just not fair.
Okay, and I guess I have one last question for you, and then I will give you an opportunity to add whatever you would like to add. I'd like to discuss the role of the Bar Association in your personal experience. Do you think that the Bar Association, our Richmond County Bar Association, was helpful at all during this time?
So I'm a member of a lot of different bar associations, right? I'm a member of American Bar Association, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, New York State Bar Association, and the Richmond County Bar Association. And by far, the Richmond County Bar Association was the most helpful. I thought that the job that Jay Duskin and the rest of the board did was spectacular in getting the information out, being on top of things, trying to keep people calm. I mean, literally, I'm sure there has not been a year like this in the history of the Richmond County Bar Association. And, to have and I said this about, our leaders in New York. After September 11th, Rudy Giuliani was a calming force. At the beginning of this whole coronavirus thing, Governor Cuomo was a calming force, right? And certainly throughout the whole time, Jay Duskin was a calming force, where he was, very matter of fact, saying this is what's going on, and this is what we're looking at, and we're looking at possibly opening here, and this is the latest. And it was nice to have somebody paying attention to the big picture and getting the information out and caring.
I agree with you. Knowledge is power, and as I said to someone else, but for Jay Duskin, I would not be able to understand some of the orders that were issued.
I agree. I'm right with you, because, I would read the orders and I was like,
that was my face.
like, yeah, what was that? And you'd have to read it 2 or 3 times and then read the press coverage of it and try and figure out what it is. And then Jay would say, okay, this is what's happening.
Right.
In plain English. And it was very helpful. It was very helpful. And,
Okay.
and honestly, like, I could not have been happier with the response from the Richmond County Bar during this time period.
That's great. So now if you have anything else that you would like to add. besides the questions? Please do.
I would say only that, hopefully we come out of this more efficient than we went into it. I've said many times that if the court system were a business, it would be bankrupt because it's just so completely inefficient. And now we could say to ourselves, okay, this is what's going on. What do we do? How do we get through it? How do we make ourselves better? And, maybe you're right. Maybe Zoom isn't the way to do a jury trial because you do need to interact with people and people need to interact with one another, although everyone's getting more used to communicating this way. But other than the actual jury trials themselves, there's pretty much nothing that cannot be done virtually. Whether it's arguing a motion or appearing for a conference or a settlement conference. Like I said, I did a settlement conference with Judge Aliata, and I was like, wow, and we didn't settle the case, but I was like, that was really good. That was really good. So, I mean, you're not quite in the room with him, but do you have to be? I don't think you do.
Well, I would say that about jury trials, there's also concern, for me, I would be paranoid, and I'm not afraid to use the word paranoid if this would be my trial, for example, and a juror disconnects, like technology fails on his end, and it disconnects and he does not hear my closing or my
Right.
cross, and I just lost that juror because of failed technology. Plus, you never know who's sitting with the juror, if the juror is going to get up and be exposed to something that he's not supposed to be exposed. So that's a hard no for me.
No, I have to agree. I mean, the one thing about having a jury is that you have their undivided attention.
Yes.
Right? When they're sitting in that jury box, I mean, sometimes people fall asleep, right? We can do that. But, hopefully they don't when I'm talking, right? But they do from time to time. But keeping people occupied and having their attention is a big portion of it. If I could be sitting here and on my computer and playing games in the background or surfing the web, you don't have my attention, right? And that's real. It's really important. If the jury is the person that's going to be making a very important decision, either to find somebody guilty of a crime or to determine liability in a civil case, you need undivided attention. So that's why I don't think necessarily that's the way to go. I mean, theoretically, you could do deliberations maybe remotely, because that's one of the issues, right? Well, if you think about it, the issue that we're trying to address with the coronavirus in jury trials is them being so close to one another, right? So in a courtroom, I mean, the jury boxes are tight, and we've had some courtrooms where they're really tight, but you could theoretically, figure out a way to make them fit in a courtroom and spread them out a little bit, especially a civil jury. But it's putting them in the juror's room that really, especially when you have a criminal jury when there's 12 people and with 4 alternates, right, 16 people stuck in a room, that's what we're concerned about. So maybe you could do that remotely, where they could do their deliberations remotely. It's not the same as listening to evidence, but that would probably even be a stretch. You certainly want them in the courtroom paying attention.
It's still not an ideal process, but I can see how it might work, because I can't imagine 12 people using Zoom as well. That would be a hard no for me as well, because as you like right now, both of us are speaking. Imagine 12 people deliberating at the same time, and it's a challenge. We're gonna have to see what's gonna happen with that, because technology might be a blessing and it might be a curse at the same time.
Well, one of the things that I mentioned to you, I guess, before we started recording, I've been taking classes through Harvard Extension School now for over 2 years to get a master's degree. So I'm used to using Zoom, and these classes, like the class I'm taking this 3-week period, a summer class. It's 3 hours a day, 4 days a week. Plus we had a meeting today and we have one on Sunday. So it's a big time commitment, but you get used to talking to people virtually. You get used to using the technology. And in that case, in that class, there's 40 some odd people in the class. And in my last semester, there was a class where it was probably over 50 people. So long as the host has the ability to mute people, there are things that you could do. And maybe it's for the courts, if you're going to have people go home and deliberate, or deliberate from home, maybe what you do is you give them an iPad and you have them work off of a court system's iPad with nothing else on it, and you have them doing their deliberations that way. Although I don't think anything is going to beat live in-person deliberations. The only thing I would say is that I know that there are plaintiffs' lawyers, especially in the suite where I am, that are dying to try a case, and they don't want to wait 2 years or a year and a half. So they may be willing to do something novel, and we are in the 21st century, and
Yes.
you have to say to yourself, it's time to change with the times. And the court system could certainly be much more efficient if you're the judge and I come on and we spend a half an hour at 4:30 in the afternoon, as opposed to 100 people waiting around hoping that their case gets called. And you have 3 of the 4 attorneys, but one isn't there yet because they're on the ferry coming over from Manhattan. It's not an efficient system that we use.
I guess we're gonna have to see and just see for ourselves how things will unfold. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
Just that, hopefully that what comes out of this is that we make our system better, that we use this as an opportunity to improve.
I love your optimism. Robert, thank you so much for your time, and
Well,
I
thank you.
appreciate you participating in this.